Here's a reading from Mark Nepo entitled "Two Monks Climb a Mountain." Once Ramahun reached a slightly elevated patch of ground, the crowd grew quiet, and he began. Let me tell you a story. There are two monks. Both have followed the Buddha's teaching all their lives. They are considered to be holy men who have prepared many years for a sacred journey, and one day they begin. Together they start to climb a holy mountain, for they believe that the Buddha himself waits at the top. But halfway up, one of the monks breaks his leg and can't go on. Now half the crowd identified with the broken monk and half with his friend. Ramahun allowed the notion to sink in, then went on. Well, they stay the night, hoping to continue in the morning, but the broken monk now has a fever. It's clear he can't go on, and indeed, he can't stay there either. He needs to be brought back into the world so he can heal. Just what should the other monk do? Should he leave his brother so he can achieve nirvana? Or carry his brother back into samsara? Tell me, what would you do? Tell me. A young man full of devotion blurted out, I would make him as comfortable as I could and keep my destiny with Buddha. Ramahun spoke to him directly. And what if you were left behind? The young man was proud of his clarity. I would accept my failings and get out of the way. The prophet looked at the young, devoted man for a long time and finally sighed. And who among you will travel with this holy man? He stared at the young man, then spoke to the larger crowd. Now you can make the mountain what you will, whatever you desire, whatever you aspire to be or have. But is any goal worth a single life? Even meeting Buddha? And what if you are meant to discover that caring for another is the summit? The crowd went silent, and Ramahun brought his insight into the open. You see, all beings can be understood in this way. There are those who would leave their brothers broken on the mountain, and those who would forego the mountain of their dreams to preserve life. He kept penetrating through the opening he felt in the crowd. The history of this kind of suffering is vast. For each era has its share of those broken along the way. When most are left behind, we have an era of cruelty. When most are cared for, we have an era of compassion. It's as simple as this. Which are you? And what will you teach your children? In this Buddhist parable, may we find wisdom for our living. A story of a father and two sons, taken from Luke chapter 15. There was once a man who had two sons. The younger said to his father, Father, I want right now what's coming to me. So the father divided the property between them. It wasn't long before the younger son packed his bags and left for a distant country. There, undisciplined and dissipated, he wasted everything he had. After he'd gone through all his money, there was a bad famine all through that country, and he began to hurt. He signed on with a citizen there who assigned him to his fields to slop the pigs. He was so hungry he would have eaten the corn cobs in the pig slop, but no one would give him any. That brought him to his senses. He said, all those farmhands working for my father sit down to 3 meals a day, and here I am starving to death. I'm going back to my father. I'll say to him, I am so sorry. I don't deserve to be called your son. Take me on as a hired hand. He got right up and went home to his father. When he was still a long way off, his father saw him, his heart pounding. He ran out, embraced him, kissed him. The son started to apologize. But the father wasn't listening. He was calling to the servants, "Quick, bring a clean set of clothes and dress him. Put the family ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. Then get a grain-fed heifer and roast it. We're going to feast. We're going to have a wonderful time. My son is here, given up for dead and now alive, given up for lost and now found." And they began to have a wonderful time. All this time his older son was out in the field. When the day's work was done, he came in. As he approached the house, he heard the music and the dancing. Calling over one of the houseboys, he asked what was going on. He told him, "Your brother came home. Your father has ordered a feast, barbecued beef, because he has him home, safe and sound." The older brother stalked off in an angry sulk and refused to join in. His father came out and tried to talk to him, but he wouldn't listen. The son said, "Look how many years I've stayed here serving you, never giving you one moment of grief. But have you ever thrown a party for me and my friends? Then this son of yours, who has thrown away your money on whores, shows up and you go all out with a feast." His father said, "Son, you don't understand. You're with me all the time, and everything that is mine is yours. But this is a wonderful time, and we have to celebrate. This brother of yours was dead, and he's alive. He was lost, and he's found." In this ancient parable from the Jesus tradition, may we find wisdom for our living.
When we read that old familiar parable, I want to believe that this time it's going to turn out like the perfect Christmas movie. That somehow this time the plot will resolve in the most satisfying way, that the family will all be reunited, will have all those elements of rift, redemption, reconciliation, and with a great Hollywood ending. And this first century story does have its fair share of Disney moments. A decision that changes everything for a family. A crisis that becomes a turning point. A choice to risk returning home, to get off the street in order to eat, even if humble pie is the only thing on the menu. We hold our breath as the next scene unfolds, knowing it could have been a death in the family that brought him home, but instead this father has lived to see the day when his youngest would walk up the driveway, knock on the door to which he no longer has a key. And he lived to hear his son acknowledge the pain he's caused his family, to face up to his failures, and to live into the humiliation and the courage it took to come home. And yet, instead of a fairy tale ending, we get a cliffhanger. That diligent son the father could always count on appears just in time to ruin the reunion. The invisible older brother who hasn't been seen since the first sentence that told us the father had two sons. He shows up just in time to mess up the happy ending and leave the story unfinished for us. As the credits roll and the music plays, we are left without knowing whether this family can be whole again or not, whether healing can happen or estrangement is the place they are all going to live unhappily ever after. I don't know about you, But part of me always wants to urge the brother who's always been there just to suck it up one more time. Just to let his dad be happy for once. To not leave an empty place at the table tonight. To just tuck his principles into his pocket for the evening and go to dinner. Make it the perfect family Christmas. I want to know what it would take for his anger to soften and for his love for his father to outweigh his rage for his brother. 2/3 of this story belongs to the problem child. Generally, he even gets to lay claim to the title, too. Don't we all know this story as the story of the prodigal son? Where the younger son seems destined to play the lead, and the father is the strong supporting actor, and the mother and the sisters are never seen or heard from. And the older brother makes a cameo appearance with all his speaking lines left to the last scene. No matter where that younger brother is, whether he's leaving home or homeless or returning home, he gets all the ink, all the energy, all the attention. But whose story is it really? In many ways, the plot turns on the compassion of the parent. The storyteller told us what the outcome was going to be between the father and the younger son, irrespective of what the son had rehearsed for himself to say when he got home. Because when he was just turning up the driveway, the father was racing down the driveway, racing with compassion to embrace him. So whether or not he'd sought to make amends or he'd come home to make more demands, he was going to be met with his father's compassion and embraced by his love, no matter what. Yet in the end, of the 3 characters the story gives us, the older brother holds all the cards. It's really up to him how the story will end. He can remain enraged and refuse to speak to his brother. He can risk reconciliation and possibly complete the embrace of compassion. Or he can keep the family broken even though they're all together under one roof. He will be the one to decide how this story ends, whether the last word is anger or acceptance, whether the final word is compassion or rage. He determines the outcome. Because he is the monk with the 2 good legs. And where his legs will take him depends on his heart. A heart torn between being ruled by its well-reasoned rage and its utterly unreasonable compassion. He's in the same position as the storied mountain climbing monk who has been sidetracked from his path of devotion by one who needs his inconvenient care. The older brother, too, has to decide which summit he will climb to. The summit of being right or the summit of compassion? The summit of standing on his righteous rage or the summit of reconciliation? In each of these parables, we see how complex compassion can be, that it makes utterly unreasonable demands of us, that it isn't easy, that it's often illogical. It puts us in a bind. Sometimes between our competing values, sometimes between making things right or letting things go, between expecting something in return and requiring nothing in return, between conversations that could open us to our anger and our disappointment and our grief and our resentment and our failures, or that stony silence that will preserve our narrative. Imagine what could happen in that ancient story if these siblings could sit down together and share their tears and their fears, their mistakes and their hurts. If the younger brother could say whatever it was that had possessed him, to want his father dead and gone, give me my inheritance as though you were dead and gone. If he could say what happened to him after he left home, if he could talk about his homesickness and his despair, if he could say how it was to hit rock bottom and then to come home to face the music, if he could say how terrified he was to walk up the driveway. Imagine what could happen if the older brother could talk about his heartbreak in becoming an only child, in losing his brother, in taking on all the responsibility for his parents. If he could talk about his loneliness in missing his only sibling, his bewilderment in being abandoned by his brother. What could happen if these brothers could share their pain, which is the very foundation of compassion? Calm, to be with, passion, pain, with pain. Imagine what could happen for the mountain climbing monks if they could share the disappointment that they won't achieve their goal, that their appointment with the Buddha has turned out to be the journey, not the arriving. If they could see that their destinies are woven together in such a way that is, they either go to the summit together, no one goes on alone, and no one is left behind. If they could reframe the summit as the place where they are right now, the place where care is given and received, that nirvana is experienced in this act of caring for one another. 'Tis the season, however we celebrate it, when we are confronted at every corner with the compassion crises of our culture, when every charity is sharing stories of need and asking for our help, when every day is Giving Tuesday in our inbox and in our mailbox, when the desperation of so many is so visible to us, and the realities of human cruelty, of war, displacement, hunger, economic disparity, when those realities overwhelm us and exhaust our compassion. 'Tis the season when our Jewish brothers and sisters celebrate the miracle of just enough oil to keep the light going. When our tradition tells the tale of an untimely birth in a dangerous time, a family forced to flee and seek refuge in a foreign land without ever disclosing the characters who helped provide safety. 'Tis the season when we're faced with the difficult conversations we need to have, or the history we need to lay down in order to put our feet under the same table. The ways we need to lend our strength to help each other off the mountain. 'Tis the season for our compassion to lighten the darkness with simple and tender acts of kindness for someone, in some moment, in a gesture, in a simple expression of care, in a human-making moment that robs selfishness and cruelty from having the last word. We each have the power to write a compassionate ending to these parables, somewhere, with someone, sometime in this season. And so we take this moment we hold with one another as our opportunity to consider where compassion invites us to create a better story in this season.